Hello and welcome to this tutorial to learn more about the flat rate pricing calculator in the Labor Pricing for a Profit version 6.0. Flat rate pricing is without a question of a doubt the method of pricing that will be used in the future. There's no question about it. As the cost for your company continue to increase, the costs to hire employees, the cost to put trucks on the road, as those costs continue to rise, our hourly rate has to rise to cover them. Well, once you get above that range of $75 to $100 an hour, pretty soon it's basically impossible to get what you need to charge from the customer. And the mindset of the customer is basically, look, I don't make that. My spouse does. We don't make that combined. Why should we pay you that? Well, you need to charge that in order to cover the cost of operating your company and generate a reasonable profit. The only option you will have is to move over to flat rate pricing. Now, one of the things that can get you in trouble with flat rate pricing is to say, well, I'm just going to simply use whatever hourly rate I'm doing today, and I'm going to base my flat rate books off of that. That may or may not be correct. And so we built a flat rate pricing calculator into the Labor Pricing for a Profit software to help you determine exactly what that internal hourly rate needs to be that you will use in your flat rate pricing. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. The first thing we're going to do is to make sure that we are in the Calculators section of our left-hand toolbar simply by clicking on the Calculators tab. Then we're going to go down and click the fourth icon labeled Flat Rate Pricing Calculator. Now when we do that, the Flat Rate Pricing Calculator itself will open up. And there's a couple of different things that we need to look at. First, the blue box in the middle here always tells us what department we're currently looking at. We can change this department simply by clicking on the desired department in the department list on the top half of the screen. Typically, flat rate pricing will be used for your service department. And so in our case, we'll click on the service department to make sure that we stay with that department in our example. Now, before we actually look at the pricing, we need to modify or verify some of our flat rate pricing parameters. And we do that by clicking on the Modify Flat Rate Parameters icon on the right-hand side of our calculator. There's a couple of questions that we need to answer within the software to help it determine what that internal hourly rate needs to be. The first one is the percent of time spent performing diagnostics. In other words, when your technician goes out to the job, typically what percentage of their time is spent figuring out what's wrong. Now I know on some jobs it's going to take them 30 seconds, and on other jobs it's going to take them 2 hours. But as a general rule, how long does it take them to figure out what's wrong? Typically, it's going to be about 20% of their time will be spent figuring out what's wrong. So go ahead and set this value to whatever would be appropriate for your company. The next item is diagnostic fee. Do you charge a diagnostic fee today? Now, again, remember the diagnostic fee would typically be designed to offset the cost of getting to the job and covering that 20% of time that you're there figuring out what's wrong. So, in our case, we're charging $60. The diagnostic fee itself isn't necessarily that important as to how much you charge. The main thing is, are you charging one? Next is the number of diagnostic calls per day. Now, this is how many service calls can your entire crew run in a given day. Now, typically, the national average is 5 service calls per day per technician. So in our case, we have 2 technicians. We can run 10 calls a day. In some areas, it's going to be a little bit higher than that. In other areas, it'll be a little bit lower. But what is it for your company? How many typical service calls do you run in a day? The next question is, if you go out to the job, you find out what's wrong, and you give the customer a quote for the repair. At that point in time, do you retain that diagnostic fee or do you waive it? In other words, there's some trades, and the plumbing industry tends to waive it. In other words, saying, okay, we've got that $60 diagnostic fee. If we come out, diagnose the problem, give you a price to fix it, if you have us go ahead with it, we'll waive that $60 diagnostic fee. In that particular case, it's not retained, and you would set this to no. If you do retain it, and HVAC, for example, tends to retain it. So we're going to come out, we'll tell you what's wrong, we'll give you a price, and the cost of the repair will be the $60 diagnostic fee plus whatever the repair charge is. You can do it either way. There's pros and cons to either method, but bottom line is we still need to retain and get that $60 somehow. So even if we waive it, it needs to be built into our internal hourly rate to make sure that we're still remaining profitable throughout the year. So in our case, we're going to say no, it is not retained. The next box is the percent of the time that the work is performed when a diagnostic call is made. In other words, the technician has gone out there, they've found out what's wrong, they've quoted the price. Once they quote a price, what percentage of the time does a customer say, yeah, let's go ahead and do the work? Now, typically, that's going to be somewhere between 90 and 95%. Realistically, closer to 95% of the time, the customer will say, yes, let's go ahead and do that. So once we've set those or answered those 5 questions, we can click on the OK box, and down below, our software will automatically calculate our flat rate pricing based on the parameters that we just entered in. So we can start to see from the right-hand side here, our current time and material rate was $135.78 because we told the software earlier that we wanted to make a 15% net profit before taxes. In order to do that with our billable hours and our overhead, we need to charge $135.78. In order to do that with flat rate pricing, the way that we set our program up, our internal hourly rate for flat rate would need to be $165.66. That's where some contractors get into a problem saying, okay, my time and material rate is $135.78. I'm going to use that as my internal hourly rate for the flat rate system, and we'll be okay. And the minute they put that flat rate program in place, they start losing money. So this becomes an important calculator to use. Now I want to share one little twist to this with you just so you know what's happening. And I'm going to go back into modify parameters, and I'm going to say this time, well, let's go ahead and yes, we are going to still retain the $60 diagnostic fee. Now if I do that and click on OK, again, to hit that 15% net profit, my hourly rate was $135.78. That hasn't changed. But you'll notice the internal hourly rate for flat rate is now showing $88.32. In other words, I could charge less with an internal hourly rate. Well, the reason for that is this. It's that if you are going to retain your diagnostic fee, in other words, we're going to keep that $60 diagnostic fee, plus we're going to charge them the flat rate, the software is, again, calculating what is it going to take to hit that 15% net profit. And we're still doing that. 15% net profit showing right here. In other words, that extra $60 diagnostic is a whole lot more profit and revenue coming into the company. So our recommendation is always, if you're going to retain your diagnostic fee, then use the calculated time and material rate, in our case of $135.78. That will ensure your profitability. It will ensure and actually increase the profitability of your company and do a long way to making your company a very successful company. This concludes this particular tutorial. We recommend that you watch the balance of the tutorials in this CD to get the most out of the labor pricing for profit software. Thank you.